A story of betrayal, redemption, and a love written in moonlight. Snow does not forgive. It does not care about your title, your rank, or the child you carry beneath your heart. It simply falls cold and indifferent, burying everything in white silence. And on the night Annabelle was cast out of the Silverwood pack like a discarded letter, the snow fell harder than it had in 20 years. She pressed her back against the rough bark of a pine tree, her torn blue dress soaked through to her skin. Her left hand trembled against the swollen curve of her belly. Her right hand was pressed to her ribs, trying to slow the bleeding from where Joseph's beta had shoved her through the iron boundary post on the way out. Not out of cruelty, or so the man had told himself. Just following orders. Following orders. The two words that good people use to do terrible things. The trees ahead of her were old. Ancient, really. The kind of forest that remembers things, that holds secrets in its roots the way bones hold marrow. This was the Ashwood, the cursed stretch of wilderness that bordered the northern edge of Silverwood territory. And no wolf ventured here willingly. The pack of children whispered about it. The elders refused to speak of it at all. It was the place where the exiled went, where the unwanted disappeared. Joseph knew exactly what he was doing when he told them to take her this way. Annabelle's breath came out in small, broken clouds. She tried to stand. Her legs refused. She tried again, slowly, the way her mother once taught her to rise after a fall, not with rage, but with intention. One knee, then both feet, her hand on the bark. Her chin lifted. She was 26 years old. She was 8 months pregnant. She had been a loyal Luna for 3 years. And she had been discarded in the time it took Joseph to raise his hand at a pack council meeting and say the words that severed her bond like a blade through silk. I, Joseph Harlan, Alpha of Silverwood, reject you, Annabelle Cole, as my mate and Luna. The crowd had been silent. That silence was the worst part. Not the rage she expected. Not the protests from those who loved her. But the silence of a pack that had already been told what to believe before she walked through those doors. Sophia had done her work well. A branch cracked somewhere to her left. Annabelle went still. The Ashwood had no sound before that. No wind. No owls. No rustling. Just the hush of falling snow and the distant sound of her own heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. Technically. Hers, and the little one who had no idea what was happening outside of the warmth they shared. But now something was there. She turned slowly. Her wolf senses dulled from the shock of the broken bond, but not completely dead. And through the curtain of snow and dark between the trees, she saw them. Eyes golden, unblinking, steady as lanterns. Not hunting, not advancing, just watching. A wolf massive, far larger than any she had seen inside pack lines. Its black fur absorbed the darkness around it so completely that it seemed less like an animal and more like a gap in the world. A place where light had simply given up. But those eyes, those gold, burning, eerily calm eyes held something that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. They held recognition. Behind the wolf, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, stood a man. Tall, still, cloaked in a coat so dark it blended with the treeline. She could not see his face clearly, but she could see his hands and the scars that ran across both forearms like the marks left by something that had tried, and failed, to break him. She had heard stories about the man who bore those scars. Every wolf in the Northern Territories had. Michael Ashford, the cursed alpha exiled 7 years ago, marked by the moon goddess herself, not in punishment. The old stories whispered, but in warning. A warning that no one had understood yet. He was staring at her. Not with pity. Not with hunger. Not with the cold calculation of a man measuring a threat. He was staring at her the way someone stares at a thing they have been waiting a long time to find. Annabelle's legs gave way. She slid back down the tree, one arm wrapped around her belly, one hand pressed into the snow. She was bleeding, she was freezing. The bond she had given 3 years of her life to maintain was gone, cut at the root. But she was not alone. And somehow impossibly that felt like the first true thing that had happened to her all night. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because if Annabelle's first few moments already have you gripping something, you are not alone. Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to the story.
To understand why the rejection broke the entire pack, not just Annabelle, you have to go back 12 hours. The Silverwood Alpha Hall was the kind of room designed to make you feel small. Ceilings carved from ancient pine, 4 stories high. Stone floors worn smooth by 100 years of boots and bare paws and the tread of important people making important decisions. The walls held oil paintings of every alpha who had led the pack since its founding, and on the largest wall behind the raised council dais, the silver crest of Silverwood, a wolf mid-howl, head thrown back, moon rising behind it, gleamed under the torchlight. Annabelle had stood under that crest 100 times as Luna. I'm proud of it. She had overseen mediations in this hall. She had welcomed new pack members into their bonds here. She had once, in her 2nd year, talked a desperate young wolf down from a decision that would have ended his life, simply by sitting beside him on these stone steps and listening until dawn. She had given this hall her best. Now she stood at its center in chains of a different kind, no metal, just judgment, while the entire senior pack council watched from their seats, and Joseph stood at the high dais with his jaw set and his eyes like 2 closed doors. Beside him, in a seat she had no official right to occupy, sat Sophia Crane. Sophia was composed the way expensive things are composed, of polished surface, sharp edges underneath. She wore deep burgundy, her dark hair pinned up, her hands folded in her lap. She was watching Annabelle the way you watch a performance you already know the ending of. Annabelle Cole. The pack recorder, an older wolf named Devin, stood to read from the parchment before him. His voice shook slightly. He had known Annabelle since she arrived. You are brought before the Silverwood Council on the charge of treason, specifically, of passing pack boundary information to a rogue faction operating in the Ashwood territory. Evidence has been entered into record. The council has reviewed it. Alpha Joseph Harlan will now speak. Joseph rose. Annabelle looked at him, and her first thought, the thought she would remember later as the truest thing she had ever noticed about him, was that he did not look angry. He looked relieved, as if this was something he had been building toward for a while and was glad to finally be arriving at. I will speak plainly, Joseph said, because this pack deserves plainness, not performance. He pulled a folder of documents from the table and held it up. These are communications intercepted 3 weeks ago between a rogue scout and a source inside Silverwood. The handwriting has been verified by 2 independent analysts. The content describes patrol schedules, rotations, and the location of our northern boundary gap, information that only a senior-ranking member of this pack would have. The hall was so quiet that Annabelle heard the snow beginning outside. The source, Joseph continued, his voice never wavering, is identified as Luna. The correspondence is signed. The evidence is clear. Annabelle opened her mouth. Joseph, you will not call me that in this hall. Not cruel. Just final. You will address me as Alpha, or not at all. Something shifted in her chest. Not the bond breaking yet, that would come later. This was something older. The realization that the man looking at her from that dais was not the man who had pressed his forehead to hers on their mating night and told her that she was the bravest soul he had ever met. That man had not come to this hearing. Alpha, she said, and the word tasted like ash. I did not write those letters. I have never communicated with rogue scouts. I have spent 3 years protecting this pax. The evidence does not agree with you. Then the evidence was made. Her voice was steady. She had promised herself it would stay steady. Someone put my name on those documents. Someone with access to my handwriting and enough motive to want me gone. And I think, she looked directly at Sophia, who did not flinch, not even slightly, that this council knows who that someone might be, if they are willing to look. A murmur moved through the seats. Sophia smiled just barely, just briefly, the kind of smile worn by someone who has anticipated every possible countermove and prepared for each one. Joseph raised his hand once. The murmur died. The council has reached its verdict, Devin said. He was definitely shaking now. By a vote of 7-2, Annabelle Cole is found guilty of breach of pack trust and endangerment of pack security. 2 votes. Someone had believed her. Maybe 2 people. She filed that away in the part of her mind that was still thinking clearly, even as the rest of her began to feel the distance growing like being pulled slowly from a shore you thought was solid ground. Joseph descended from the dais. He walked toward her slowly, and she watched him come, her hand sliding instinctively to her belly, a gesture so automatic she barely noticed it. He did. He saw it, and something moved across his face. No regret. Not softness. Something faster than either of those. Something she could not name before it was gone. He stood before her, close enough that she could smell the cedar of his coat, the familiar scent that had once meant home. It meant nothing now. It just smelled like loss. "I, Joseph Harlan, Alpha of Silverwood," he said, and his voice carried the resonance of Alpha command, pressing against her wolf like a physical weight. "Hereby reject you, Annabelle Cole, as my mate, my Luna, and my bond partner. Your connection to this pack is severed. You are to be escorted beyond our territory before nightfall." The severing was not like anything she had ever been warned about. The pack bond and the mate bond, when both were cut at once, it did not feel like pain, exactly. It felt like the sudden absence of sound in a room you did not know was loud until it went quiet. It felt like every warm thing in her body cooling by 10 degrees in a single breath. She swayed. She did not fall. She refused to fall here, in front of all of them, in front of Sophia. She looked up at Joseph one final time. "You will understand what you have done," she said quietly. "Not today. But you will." Joseph did not answer. He turned and walked back to the dais. And Sophia, beautiful, composed, immovable Sophia, reached out and placed her hand on his arm as he sat down, and he let her. The guards came for Annabelle. And she walked out of that hall with her back straight, her chin up, and her hand resting over the child who would one day remake everything. Here is what this story wants you to notice, not just feel. False evidence ruins lives. In courtrooms, in communities, in relationships, the manufactured accusation, the planted lie, the document that looks undeniable, these are weapons. And the people who wield them count on their targets being too stunned to fight back immediately. Annabelle was not wrong to name it. She was not wrong to look at Sophia and say what she saw. The first act of courage is often just telling the truth out loud in a room that has already decided against you. The 2 guards who escorted Annabelle to the Ashwood boundary were not unkind men. That was the strangest part. One of them, a young beta named Cole from the Eastern Patrol, no relation, kept looking at her sideways, kept almost saying something, kept pressing his mouth closed again. The other walked a full step behind, which was more deference than the situation required. They were following orders and they were ashamed of it. But they followed them anyway. That too is a thing worth noting. Shame without action is just guilt with better posture. The Ashwood boundary post was a flat stone marker with old runes carved along its edge, placed generations ago to mark where pack magic ended and something older began. Past this post, Silverwood's protective boundary did not extend. A wolf without pack magic in the Ashwood in winter was as exposed as a human. Annabelle stepped past the marker. The young beta Cole stopped just short of the line. He looked at her. She looked back. "Luna," he said very quietly. "Not anymore," she told him. "Not angry. Just accurate." He slipped something into the snow beside the boundary stone and turned away without another word. The other guard followed. She heard their footsteps fading back through the trees. She crouched and picked up what Cole had left. A folded cloth. Inside it, 2 dried meat strips, a folded bandage, and a single match. Not much. Enough to say, "I see you. I'm sorry. I can't do more." She tucked it against her skin and walked into the Ashwood. For 20 minutes, she walked in silence. The cold was different here, not merely the cold of winter but the cold of a place that had seen too much and remembered all of it. The trees were close together, their bare branches laced overhead like the fingers of joined hands. The snow filtered down in fragments rather than flakes. Everything was blue and gray and very, very still. The bleeding from her side was manageable until it wasn't. She paused to press the bandage Cole had left against her ribs, and that was when the pain she had been refusing to acknowledge arrived all at once. The severing, the cold, the hours of standing straight under judgment, the weight of a pregnancy her body had been carrying without warmth for too long tonight. She found the pine tree by instinct, the widest one, the one that broke the wind, and she leaned against it and slid down slowly, because her legs had decided they were done regardless of what her mind had to say about it. "Okay," she said aloud, to the child, to herself, to whatever was listening in these old trees. "We are going to be fine." She almost believed it. Then the branch cracked, and she turned and saw the golden eyes. The wolf did not advance. It held its position 30 feet away, massive and still, those amber gold eyes tracking her with an attention that was nothing like the blank focus of a predator. This was an assessment. Recognition. Almost, she thought, relief. Behind the wolf, the man stepped forward slightly enough for the fractured moonlight through the bare branches to fall on the lower half of his face. Strong jaw. Lips pressed together. Scars running up both forearms from old fights she would learn about later. He raised one hand. Slow. Not threatening. The wolf at his side dropped immediately into a lower posture, telegraphing, "I will not come closer. I'm not a threat." Then the man spoke. "You are bleeding," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that has learned not to startle frightened things. "And the temperature drops another 8 degrees by midnight. I have shelter 20 minutes north. I am not asking you to trust me." The pause. "I am only asking you to not die out here." Annabelle studied him. In fairy tales, the stranger in the dark woods is the danger. But Annabelle had just spent 3 years trusting the man in the bright hall, and looked where that had landed her. Perhaps the calculus of trust needed re-examining. Besides, she had a child to think about. And the child's options at this precise moment were, follow the scary man with the scars to shelter, or remain here beside a pine tree and let the ashwood winter have its say. Framed that way, it was not a complicated decision. 20 minutes, she said. Exactly, he said. She tried to stand. Her legs, predictably, declined. He was beside her before she registered him moving, not rushing, not grabbing, but there, offering a forearm with the steadiness of someone who has helped injured things before and knows that steadiness matters more than speed. She took hold of his arm, got upright, exhaled. "Michael," he said. "I know who you are," she said. A half-beat of silence. Most people say that differently. Most people haven't been exiled tonight. He made a sound that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a laugh. Then he adjusted his grip, took the majority of her weight without comment, and led her north through the ashwood. The wolf walked ahead of them, breaking a path through the deeper snow. The cabin was not what she expected. She had been braced for something dark and half-ruined, the kind of dwelling that announced its owner's fallen state. She had been ready to find cobwebs and cold ashes and the general atmosphere of a man who had given up on comfort. Instead, the cabin was warm. Not just warm as in structurally sound and holding heat, warm as in lived in, tended, loved in a quiet and practical way. A fire was already burning, which meant he had laid it before he left this evening. 2 oil lanterns on the central table. Shelves lining one wall with books and dried herbs and glass jars of stored food, organized in a way that spoke of habit. A rug over the wooden floor, worn thin in the middle from years of pacing but still there, still doing its job. A bed in the far corner, blankets folded. A second sleeping space near the fire is a pallet, clean. He steered her to the chair nearest the fire without speaking, disappeared briefly, and returned with a tin basin of water, clean cloth, and what she recognized as wolfsbane-free healing salve, the kind used for injuries where the wound needed to close properly, not just seal over. "You can manage that yourself," he said, setting everything on the small table beside the chair, "or I can. Your choice." "I can manage." She reached for the cloth, then stopped. The angle of the wound was at the back of her ribs, where she could not quite reach. She tried anyway. He watched her try for approximately 4 seconds before quietly moving her hand aside and doing it himself efficiently, gently, without commentary. "It's not deep," he said. "I know." You've had worse. She looked at him over her shoulder. He wasn't asking. He was observing the way someone observes when they have been watching from a distance for a while and are finally close enough to confirm what they already suspected. How long have you been in Ashwood? She asked. 7 years. And how long have you been watching Silverwood? The pause. He tied off the bandage. Long enough. He moved away, adding a log to the fire, and the wolf which had settled near the door like an enormous, golden-eyed doorstop made a low-content sound that was almost comical in its domesticity. Annabel looked at the animal. The animal looked back. That's Lark, Michael said without turning around. He doesn't usually tolerate strangers. He's not your wolf, she said slowly. She could feel it now. The animal carried no pack bond. No mating mark. No alpha claim. It was free. Completely, entirely free, the way almost nothing in their world was. No, Michael confirmed. He's his own. He stays because he wants to. He finally turned to face her. In the full firelight, she saw him properly for the first time. He was older than the stories made him feel, late 30s, with the kind of face that had been made more interesting by difficulty rather than less. The scars she had seen on his arms continued up to the left side of his neck, old marks, faded silver white against tan skin, unmistakably the pattern of a goddess mark. Not a burn. Not a battle wound. A deliberate inscription. She had been told those marks were a curse. She looked at them now and thought they looked more like instructions written in a language most people had forgotten how to read. Tell me about the curse, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was ready, or perhaps whether he was. Then he sat down on the opposite side of the fire and leaned his forearms on his knees. There is no curse, he said. There never was. Then what are the marks? A commission. He looked at his own arm. 7 years ago, before I was exiled, I was called into the Ashwood by Laura the moon goddess in a dream that felt nothing like a dream. She showed me something that was coming. She showed me you, specifically, though I did not know your name then. She showed me tonight. He looked up. His eyes were very steady. She told me that when the time arrived, I would know what to do. She marked me so that no ordinary wolf could touch me. Not as a punishment. As a protection. For whatever was coming. The fire popped. Lark made his soft, domestic sound again. Annabel did not speak for a full minute. You were exiled, she finally said, for a reason. I was exiled, he said, because the then alpha of my original pack feared what Laura had commissioned me for. A man with divine protection is dangerous to a man who rules through fear. A small, dry look crossed his face. My original pack alpha was Joseph Harlan's uncle. Did you know that? She had not known that. She filed it away next to the 2 dissenting votes, beside the bandage Cole had left in the snow, building something she could not yet name from pieces that were beginning to fit. You said Laura showed you this night, Annabel said. Did she show you the child? His eyes moved briefly to the curve of her belly. And what she saw there was not the hungry interest of a territorial male, not pity, not strategy. What she saw was something older and quieter. It was reverence. She showed me enough, he said. Outside the cabin, the snow thickened. Inside, for the first time in what felt like a very long day, Annabel was warm. She let her eyes close for just a moment, and the last thing she heard before she drifted into the first true rest she had managed in weeks was Lark, settling his enormous black head on the floor with a sound like a small avalanche, and Michael, very quietly, putting another log on the fire. To understand a manipulation this thoroughly, you have to understand the manipulator. Sophia Crane was 30 years old, the daughter of one of Silverwood's most respected council families, and she had been in love with Joseph Harlan since she was 14 years old. Not the warm, inconvenient, life-disrupting love of someone who does not know what to do with a feeling. The precise, planned, patient love of someone who has decided that wanting something is the same as deserving it. When Joseph took Annabel Cole as his fated mate 3 years ago, Sophia had smiled at the announcement. She had given a toast at the mating ceremony. She had brought Annabel a welcome gift, a beautifully wrapped box containing a scarf in Silverwood's colors, and she had hugged her warmly and said, I am so glad you have each other. Then she went home and she began to plan. It had taken her 18 months to find the right opportunity. The rogue activity in the Northern Territory was the opening natural, plausible, nothing Sophia had created but something she knew how to use. She had accessed Annabelle's personal correspondence files through her position as PAC Records Coordinator, a role she had quietly lobbied for 2 years prior, and she had studied Annabelle's handwriting with the patience of a student who needs to ace an exam. The letters she forged were not sloppy. This is important. They were meticulous. Sophia wrote dozens of practice drafts before settling on the final versions. She introduced small consistent imperfections, the slight leftward lean on Annabelle's lowercase, the way she closed her with a tiny hook, and she reproduced them so carefully that the 2 handwriting analysts Joseph hired genuinely believed what they were reading. She planted the letters in 3 places: the PAC Records room, Joseph's private correspondence folder, where she had access twice a week for administrative reasons, and in a locked box beneath a floorboard in the Northern Patrol cabin, which she placed 3 weeks before the trial and then helpfully suggested to Joseph that he search. She also, with careful and terrible precision, timed the revelation for exactly the week after she had discovered Annabelle's pregnancy. Sophia knew how Joseph's pride worked. She had watched it her whole life. A rejection was one thing, but to reject his mate while she carried his child? That required a wound big enough to override the instinct. The pregnancy had to be neutralized not physically, but narratively. It needed to become doubt, not joy. So over dinner 3 weeks before the trial, in that casual conversational way she had perfected, Sophia had said to Joseph, "I don't want to upset you. I'm sure it's nothing. But some of the younger wolves have been whispering about where Annabelle was on the night of the Northern Patrol breach. The timing is just strange." She had left it there. No accusation. Just a seed in fertile soil. Joseph was not a cruel man by nature. He was a man with a weakness that many leaders share. He trusted process over instinct. He trusted evidence over feeling. When confronted with forged documents that he desperately wanted not to be true, he followed procedure, because procedure felt safer than the alternative. The alternative was admitting that the woman beside his throne might be lying to him. And that was too close to admitting that he had been fooled. That is a second thing the story wants you to take with you. Manipulation rarely looks like manipulation from the inside. It looks like evidence. It looks like logic. It looks like a concerned friend giving you information you needed to know. The check against it is not cynicism, it is asking, who benefits from me believing this? Because the answer to that question is almost always the person handing you the evidence. Back in Sophia's story the day after the trial, she sat across from Joseph in his study, her hands folded, her expression concerned and gentle. "I know this is hard," she said. "I know you loved her." Joseph was staring at the window. She said the evidence was planted. They always say that. "Sophia." He turned to look at her. "The child is hers," Sophia said very carefully. "Which means it belongs to whatever choices she made." She reached out and touched his hand. "You cannot carry guilt for a decision driven by evidence. You did the right thing, Joseph." He looked at her hand. He did not move it away. Later that night, alone with the window dark and the fire burning low, Joseph Harlan would feel the first ghost of doubt. Not enough to act on. Not yet. Just the faint, persistent feeling of a man standing on ice and hearing something beneath his feet that is not quite the sound ice makes when it holds. Annabelle healed faster than she should have. She noticed on the 3rd morning the wound at her ribs, which should have taken 2 weeks to close cleanly, was already knitted. Her wolf, which had been dull and sluggish since the severing, was waking back up in a way she had not expected. Not in the direction of Silverwood, that bond remained cold and cut, but outward, toward the ashwood around her, toward the old trees and the snow and the particular quality of light that fell through the cabin's eastern window at dawn. It was as if ashwood itself was offering her something, or as if something in the ashwood had been waiting for her. Michael noticed it too. He said nothing for the first 2 days. He was a man who seemed constitutionally incapable of rushing anything, which she found simultaneously admirable and slightly maddening. On the third day, he came back from his morning patrol with fresh-caught fish and firewood and the mildly satisfied air of someone who had solved a problem he had not yet announced. "You're healing at twice the normal rate," he said, by way of good morning. "I noticed," she said. She was sitting up, which felt like a significant upgrade from yesterday. "Laura is accelerating it." "You speak about her as if you are having conversations." "I do. Not often. But clearly." He set the fish on the preparation board and began working without ceremony. "She visited me again last night. She wanted me to tell you something about the child." Annabelle went very still. "The child is prophesied," he said. Not dramatically, just as a fact, the same way he spoke every other fact. Before the northern and southern wolf territories fractured 3 generations back, there was a pact between them. A blood pact which can only be renewed through bloodline. Your family line carries half that blood. Joseph Harlan's family line carries the other half. The child carries both. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means your child, when grown, will have the standing to unite the northern and southern packs under one accord. No fighting. No territory wars. A lasting peace that has not existed for 70 years. He glanced at her. Laura said the rejection was the final condition. Not a punishment, a catalyst. It had to happen exactly as it did. Because if Annabelle Cole had remained comfortable inside Silverwood, she would have remained small. Not by choice. By circumstance. Annabelle looked at the fire for a long time. "She used me," she finally said. "She trusted you," Michael corrected gently. "There is a difference. Used is what Sophia did. Trusted is what the goddess did. One of them counted on you to break. The other counted on you to rise." It was perhaps the most useful sentence anyone had ever said to Annabelle. She turned it over in her mind for the rest of the day, examining it from every angle, and she found it held. That week was a slow unfurling. She asked him about himself, one question at a time, and he answered with the careful honesty of someone who has lived alone long enough to have stopped bothering with performance. His original pack, Iron Vale, was 4 territories east. His exile had been engineered by the then Alpha Joseph's uncle, Bennett Harlan, who had feared Michael's growing influence and the divine marking that made him impossible to physically dominate. Michael had not fought it at the time, because Laura had told him not to. Because Ashwood was where he needed to be. 7 years is a long time to wait, Annabelle said one evening, watching him repair a section of the cabin's roof board by firelight. "It was not wasted," he said simply. "What did you do?" "Read. Trained. Learned how Ashwood works. Help the strays." He paused on the board. "Wolves pass through here who have been cast out from various packs. Over the years I've helped a few dozen of them. Found them shelter, helped them heal, pointed them towards safe territory." He resumed working. "The Ashwood has a reputation for being dangerous. It is if you don't know it. If you do, it's just a forest." She watched him. The fire threw his shadow up the wall, large and steady. "Michael," she said. Thank you." She meant it for everything. The shelter, the honesty, the way he had been consistently, unhurriedly kind without ever once making her feel like a project. For all of it. He looked at her across the cabin. The firelight was between them, warm and alive. He had a way of looking at her that felt simultaneously like being seen and being given room, like standing in a space that was both large and safe. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You would have survived without me." "Maybe," she said. "But I'm glad I didn't have to." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Slowly, the way winter light shifts in the late afternoon, the same shapes, suddenly different qualities. Neither of them addressed it. Not yet. But it was there, warm and certain, growing at its own pace. The crack in Joseph Harlan appeared 14 days after the rejection, in the form of Devin. Devin, the pack recorder, was 62 years old, had served 3 alphas, and had never in his career taken a position that was not required of him by his role. He was not a man who made waves. He was a man who kept records accurately, faithfully, and with the faint professional melancholy of someone who has watched too much history repeat itself to be surprised by it. He appeared at Joseph's door at 7 in the morning with a rolled folder tucked under his arm and the expression of someone who has been losing sleep for 2 weeks. "I have to show you something," Devin said. He spread the original forged letters on Joseph's desk beside 3 authentic documents from Annabelle's file. Old reports she had written as Luna, administrative notes, a personal letter to the pack healer from 2 years prior. Then he placed a magnifying lens over the comparison point he had found. "Here," he said, pointing to the letter form in the forged documents. "And here, in authentic writing. You see the closing hook on the?" Joseph leaned in. "The hook in the forged letters," Devin said carefully, "is consistent. The same angle, the same weight, every single time. As if the person writing it had practiced until they could produce it reliably." He moved the lens. "But in Annabelle's authentic writing, which spans 3 years, the hook varies. It appears sometimes, not others. It changes with her mood, her fatigue, her pen pressure. It is inconsistent because it is genuine." He straightened. "Genuine handwriting is inconsistent. Forged handwriting is too perfect. This is a fundamental principle of forensic document analysis, Alpha, and the 2 analysts you hired were cross-checked against the forged letters only, not against Annabelle's documented body of work." Joseph stared at the letters. "Who else knows this?" he asked. "No one yet. I came to you first." "Devin, I voted against the verdict," the old man said quietly. "I was one of the 2. I want you to know that. I did not speak loudly enough at the time, and I will spend time with that. But I am speaking now." He left the folders on the desk and showed himself out. Joseph sat with the papers for a very long time. That evening, the same evening Sophia made her mistake. It was small. That is how mistakes work when you have been very careful for a long time. They are small, and they happen because your guard drops in the one moment you think you have one. Sophia was meeting with the PAC records coordinator who had replaced her in that role during the trial preparations, a young woman who had been systematically flattered and trusted by Sophia for months. The young woman had Sophia's inside access for certain documents. She had not understood this fully at the time, because Sophia had been very careful with how she framed every request. But that evening, the young woman whose name was Bria, 23 years old, 2 years in her post, found in her records cabinet a folder she had no memory of placing there. It contained practice sheets. Dozens of them. Handwriting drills. The same letters, the same words, the same phrases from Annabelle's administrative reports, copied over and over and over in increasingly refined approximations. And at the bottom of the folder, in Sophia's own clean, controlled hand, a note about the hook on the lowercase I and the precise angle needed to replicate it. Bria stood in the records room for a full 3 minutes. Then she went to find Devin. The trap had eaten itself. Back in the Ashwood, Annabelle had no way to know any of this. But on that same evening, 20 minutes north of the Silverwood boundary, she sat outside the cabin door in the clean winter air, watching the stars come out one at a time. Michael sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, saying nothing, which was the exact right thing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When Laura showed you me when she showed you this night, 7 years ago, were you frightened?" He thought about it honestly, which she had come to understand was the only way he thought about anything. "Not frightened," he said. "Responsible. It felt like being handed something valuable and understanding that you needed to not drop it." "That sounds frightening." "It sounds like the most worthwhile thing," he said. "And then, after a moment, I also thought you were going to be older." She turned to look at him. "In the vision. I assumed I didn't know why you were older." He made a face that was briefly, unguardedly wry. "I had built up a very distinguished mental portrait." She laughed. It came out before she could decide whether to let it, and it was real, full, genuine, the first real laugh in what felt like a month. Lark, who was sprawled nearby in the snow because apparently the cold was irrelevant to him, lifted his massive head and regarded her with mild offense. "A distinguished portrait," she repeated. "Silver hair. Formidable bearing. Perhaps a walking stick. I can work on the bearing." She was still smiling. It felt strange on her face. "A good stranger. Give me a few weeks." He looked at her then properly, fully, without the careful professional distance he maintained most of the time. And what she saw on his face was not guarded or complicated or strategic. It was simple and warm and true. "Take all the time you need," he said. The child came on a Tuesday. 3 weeks after the rejection, in the warmth of the Ashwood cabin, with Lark stationed outside the door as if assigned there by some authority neither Annabel nor Michael had appointed, and with Michael sitting in the chair by the fire and absolutely refusing to pretend he was not watching the door every 4 minutes Annabel's daughter arrived into the world. But perfect. Michael helped, because there was no one else, and he had helped in enough difficult situations over 7 years to not be undone by this one, though later, privately, he would admit that nothing in his previous experience had quite prepared him for the specific silence that followed that first cry. The way the room changed. The way the world rearranged itself around something so new. Annabel held her daughter, and the child blinked up at her with dark, wandering eyes that somehow already seemed to be taking notes. "Hello," Annabel said. "I'm your mother. We've been through a lot together already, and I want you to know that I see you, and I am so glad you are here." Michael, from the doorway, looked at both of them with an expression he did not bother to hide. That night, after the child slept and Annabel rested, a silver light moved through the cabin, not from the lanterns. From the south window. From the moon, which hung full and enormous in the sky, and for exactly 12 seconds it was not the ordinary light of the moon but something else warmer, deliberate, alive. Michael felt it on his scars. They did not hurt. They glowed. Then the light faded and the night was ordinary again. "Laura," he said quietly to the window. No answer. But the feeling of acknowledged completion in the room was its own kind of answer. 3 days later, a visitor arrived at the Ashwood. Not a rogue. Not an enemy. Devon, the old pack recorder, standing at the tree line with his coat buttoned against the cold and his hands empty, which was how you showed a wolf you were not there for a fight. Michael met him at the boundary. "I'm not here with permission," Devon said. "I'm here because there is a woman in that forest who was wronged in a way that can be corrected, and she deserves to know that someone is trying." He handed Michael the full evidence packet, the practice sheets, the handwriting analysis comparison, Bria's written account of finding the folder, and a document signed by 4 council members calling for an emergency review of the trial verdict. Michael carried it inside. Annabel read every page with her daughter asleep against her chest, and her face moved through a sequence of disbelief, recognition, grief, fury, and finally something past fury, something that burned cleaner. Clarity. The knowledge that she had been right the whole time, which is not a comfort exactly, but which is the ground you need under your feet before you can walk back toward the fire you came from. "When," she said. "Whenever you are ready," Michael said. "There is no timeline. We can go when you say, or not at all. Laura has not told me you need to return. That part is yours." She looked down at her daughter. At the documents. At the man sitting across from her who had never once pushed or pulled or tried to steer her toward any particular choice. "I want to go back," she said. "Not because I want Silverwood back. Not because I want Joseph. But because a lie won in that hall, and lies only keep winning if no one brings the truth back into the room." He nodded. "And I want you with me," she added. No hesitation. No qualification. He looked at her for a moment with that steady, clear, fully arrived attention of his, and then he said, very simply, "I would be nowhere else." They arrived at the Silverwood boundary on a clear morning, 12 days after the child's birth. Annabel walked. She did not need to be carried or supported, though Michael walked beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the winter air. Lark walked on her other side. The wolf attracted stares. Everything about this arrival attracted stares. Word traveled through Silverwood the way pack news always travels, instantly and everywhere. By the time Annabel reached the Alpha Hall, 36 wolves had already gathered outside it. More arriving every minute. She did not go around. She went through the front doors. Joseph was in the main chamber with Sophia at his right hand, 2 council members on his left. The council meeting that had been running for the past hour about the trial review being called by 4 of its members stopped dead when Annabel walked in. Joseph stood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She watched his face move through all the things it needed to move through: shock, relief, guilt, more guilt, and underneath it all, the particular stricken look of a proud man understanding exactly how proud he had been. Then he saw the child. The baby was asleep against Annabelle's chest, small and dark-haired and entirely unimpressed with her surroundings. Something in Joseph's face broke open very quietly at the sight of her. "Annabelle," he started. "In a moment," she said. "I have something to show the council first." Devon stepped forward and distributed copies of the evidence packet. The practice sheets, the analysis, Bria's account, the 4 council signatures. He did it efficiently and without drama, the way a man who has been holding something that needed to be put down finally puts it down. The room read in silence. Sophia was very still. This was the one move she had not prepared for, not the evidence itself, but Bria. She had believed Bria was managed. She had been wrong, and she had been wrong about Bria because she had underestimated her, which was a pattern in Sophia's life she had never bothered to examine. She was very good at accounting for threats she took seriously and very poor at accounting for the people she dismissed. Sophia Crane, the senior council member, an older woman named Ruth, said. Her voice was flat and final. "Is there anything you would like to say before this council?" Sophia looked at Joseph. He was not looking back. "I would like a lawyer," Sophia said. It was the smartest thing she had said all month, and it was also, in the context of this room, almost funny. Ruth's expression suggested she agreed with exactly one of those assessments. "You will have one," Ruth said, "after you are removed from this hall." 2 council guards stepped forward. Sophia rose, composed, elegant, maintaining posture to the last because whatever else was true of Sophia, she understood that how you exit a room is part of your story. She walked out with her chin level and her hands at her sides and only the faintest whitening at her knuckles betraying what it cost her. The doors closed behind her. The room exhaled. Joseph crossed the floor to Annabelle. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for conversation, far enough for respect. And then, in front of his entire senior council, the Alpha of Silverwood knelt. Not dramatically. Not as a performance. Slowly, as if the weight of what he had done required him to be lower than he was. "I was wrong," he said. "I let pride and process override my own judgment and I sent you into that forest knowing what was in it and He stopped. Swallowed. I tried again. There is nothing I can say that undoes this. I know that. But I need you to hear it from me directly. I was wrong, Annabelle. I am sorry." Annabelle looked down at him. She thought about what it would feel like to be cold about this. To say yes, you were, and move on without giving him anything. She had earned that right. But coldness was not her. It had never been her. And carrying something just to have it just because someone else put it in her hands was a thing she had decided she was no longer going to do. "I hear you," she said. "Stand up, Joseph." He stood. She shifted the baby slightly in her arms. "This is your daughter," she said. "I want you to know her. Not because of obligation or bloodline or prophecy. Because she deserves a father who sees her, and I think you can be that, if you let yourself stop being a man who is more afraid of being wrong than of doing right." She paused. "That is the work, Joseph. That is the only thing I am asking from you." He looked at the child. The child, apparently done sleeping, opened her eyes and regarded him with the same profound, analytical attention she had brought to everything so far. Something in Joseph Harlan quietly, irreversibly, changed. "What is her name?" he asked. Annabelle looked across the hall, across the crowd that had gathered at the open doors, across Devon who was blinking hard at his document folder, across Ruth and the other council members, across Michael who stood at the back of the room with Lark at his heel, watching her with that steady, warm, entirely uncomplicated expression of his. "Laura," she said. The name moved through the room like light. Sophia Crane was tried by the Silverwood Council 3 weeks later. The charges included forgery of official documents, procurement of restricted administrative records under false pretenses, manipulation of Alpha authority through deception, and conspiracy to exile a pregnant Luna without lawful cause. She was found guilty on all 4 counts. Her sentence was the loss of all council privileges, a formal record of her conviction in the pack archives, and a term of service 2 years working with the pack's displaced wolves unit, those who had been exiled, rejected, or lost. Ruth, who presided, noted in her decision that there was perhaps something symmetrical about that. Sophia said nothing at her sentencing. She simply accepted it, because by that point she had run out of moves. The most dangerous thing you can do with a woman like Sophia is remove her audience. She had nothing left to perform for. Joseph underwent the harder reckoning, the one that does not happen in a court but happens in the privacy of your own conscience. He commissioned an independent review of every decision made during the trial. He personally wrote to Devon, to Bria, and to the 2 guards who had escorted Annabel to the Ashwood. The young one, Cole, received a formal commendation for the bandage. It was a small thing. Joseph understood it was a small thing and did it anyway. He resigned his alpha title. Not under pressure. Not because the council demanded it. He called a full pack meeting and announced that an alpha who had been successfully deceived into exiling his pregnant Luna was an alpha whose judgment the pack could not fully trust, and that rebuilding that trust would require more than an apology. It would require demonstrated accountability. He proposed a 1-year regency council with elections to follow. Ruth, who had been the most skeptical person in every room she had ever occupied, later said that was the first thing Joseph Harlan had done in 3 years that genuinely impressed her. As for Michael, the cursed alpha who was never cursed, the exiled wolf who had spent 7 years becoming exactly what was needed by the Iron Veil Pack, upon learning of the divine commission their former alpha had received, sent a formal delegation to the Ashwood. They requested his return. He considered it for 4 days. He declined. He had already decided where he was going to be. The council, reviewing Annabel's case and the evidence of Laura's commission, did something unprecedented. They offered Annabel the Luna title not as Joseph's mate, which she was no longer, but in her own right. As an independent Luna, with full authority, answerable to the pack and to the moon goddess and to no one else above them. It had never been done in Silverwood's history. Annabel accepted. The moonlight between them. Michael moved to Silverwood's eastern edge, not inside the formal pack boundary, because he was not a member of Silverwood and did not wish to be one without careful thought, but close. Near enough. He built a larger version of the Ashwood cabin on the Silverwood side of the boundary line, and he helped with the construction with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. He and Annabel existed in the comfortable, warm, unhurried space of 2 people who have already survived the worst together and are in no particular rush to name what has grown between them. They did not need to rush. They had already shown each other the versions of themselves that most people never let anyone see. The frightened, the bleeding, the uncertain, the stubborn, the capable, the funny when least expected. The courtship, when it happened at entirely the wrong times and in thoroughly undramatic settings. It happened over the fire pit outside the new cabin while baby Laura slept inside, and both of them were too tired from the week to pretend at formality. It happened in the pack records room at 2 in the morning when they were reviewing boundary documents, and he reached past her for a folder and stopped, and she looked up, and neither of them pretended the moment was not what it was. It happened plainly and truly. That was the only way Michael did anything. "I need you to know something," he said one evening. Laura was asleep on his shoulder. She had developed a preference for him that he claimed to find unremarkable and clearly found delightful. "I have been in love with you since Ashwood. Since the night you looked at me and said, 'I know who you are,' without a trace of fear. I have been waiting to tell you because I wanted to tell you when you were standing on your own feet, not when you needed something." Annabel looked at him for a long time. "Michael," she said. "Yes. My feet are very firmly on the ground." He smiled, and it was a real smile, rare and warm and completely unguarded, the kind that changes a face entirely. She had been waiting to see that smile since the first time she suspected it existed. "I know," he said. She reached across and took his free hand. Laura, between them, made a soft sound of complete satisfaction, as if she had personally arranged the entire evening and was glad it had gone well. Outside, the moon was full and the Ashwood trees were silver with it. Lark was somewhere in the dark doing whatever enormous wolves do when they have their evenings to themselves. The fire was going. The world was, for this moment, Entirely correct. Annabelle leaned her head against Michael's shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He simply held his position steady, warm, completely present, and let the night be what it was. Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? If Annabelle's journey touched you in any way, this is the moment to stand with stories like this one. Every subscription, every like, every comment telling us where you are watching from, those are the things that keep these stories alive and keep this channel going. So before you go anywhere, please subscribe if you have not already, smash the like button, and drop a comment below. Tell us how this story made you feel. Tell us what you would have done in Annabelle's place. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. I genuinely want to know. Your support means everything. Thank you so much. Now let us finish this together. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story has gone. Annabelle Cole was rejected at the iron boundary of everything she had built. She was left in the snow with a child she had not yet met and a wound that should have broken her. She had nothing, no title, no bond, no protection, no warmth. She had her own heartbeat. And the small, stubborn second one beside it. It was enough. Joseph Harlan learned the most expensive lesson that pride teaches, that the evidence you trust most is the evidence you most want to believe, and that the cost of not questioning it is always borne by someone else. He paid his portion honestly, and in paying it, became something closer to the leader he had always believed himself to be. Growth is not comfortable. It is not supposed to be. But it is available to anyone willing to stand up from where they have fallen and ask, what do I need to do differently? Joseph asked that question. That matters. Sophia Crane learned that a plan built entirely on another person's destruction is a plan that collapses the moment its target refuses to be destroyed. She is serving her 2 years. What she does with the reflection available in that service is a story only she can write. Michael Ashford, marked, patient, steady, found exactly what he had been waiting for. Not a mission. Not a purpose. A person. And the remarkable thing about finding the right person is that it makes every difficult year before them make sense at last, not because suffering has a noble design, but because who you become in the difficult years is often exactly who the right person needs beside them. And little Laura, dark-eyed, watchful, already taking notes, is exactly 3 months old and has already demonstrated a personality that suggests the peace between northern and southern wolf territories is going to be achieved with considerable efficiency and possibly a great deal of humor. This story wants to leave you with 3 things. First, the truth is not afraid of being spoken. Even in the room that has already decided against you, even with a shaking voice and bleeding ribs, the truth has a quality that no forgery can replicate. It is inconsistent in the way of living things, and that inconsistency is precisely what makes it real. Never be afraid to say what you know. Second, the people who witness injustice and say nothing are not neutral. They are participants. Cole, the young guard, left a bandage in the snow. Devin spent 2 weeks losing sleep over forensic detail. Neither of them could stop what happened, but both of them decided that doing the small thing available to them was better than doing nothing at all. You will have those moments. Small, specific, costly moments where you can leave something in the snow or walk away. What you choose says more about you than the grand gestures ever will. Third, rejection is not definition. It is not a verdict, and it is not prophecy. It is one person's choice, shaped by their fear, their blindness, their manipulation by someone who wanted something at your expense. It says almost nothing about you and a very great deal about them. Stand up from it. Walk forward from it. Let the ashwood be dark. Walk through it anyway. Because what is waiting on the other side of your worst night is not just survival. It is lark, golden-eyed and enormous, clearing a path through the snow ahead of you. It is a cabin with a fire already lit. It is someone steady and scarred and entirely certain, standing beside you in the dark. And it is a small, dark-haired daughter who is going to change the world. Annabelle was rejected as a burden. She rose as a blessing. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes your real story doesn't begin until someone is foolish enough to tell you it is over.